The brood egg sat on Sereth's reading shelf exactly where she had placed it 3 cycles ago, warm against the cold starlight pouring through the orbital window. It pulsed faintly, a low amber that matched the rhythm of her own cracked glass veins. She had set it there as a test, actually, a small one, to see if the human would touch it without permission. He never did. Callum Bright sat cross-legged on the floor near her council chair, doing the thing he always did between her sessions. Knitting. 2 pale needles, gray yarn, some half-formed object taking shape in his lap that Sereth had never bothered to identify. He had been here when she left for the dawn assembly. He was here now, 5 hours later, still clicking those ridiculous needles together in the silence of her chambers as if the fate of 3-star systems was not being argued 40 meters above his head. Sereth crossed the room without acknowledging him. Her veins caught the light as she moved, white pale and glass-fine beneath her skin, the faint traceries that marked every Pauluri born to the high castes. She had been elevated to caste mother only 14 months prior, the youngest in this station's recorded memory, and she was acutely aware of every eye that tracked her when she walked, every subordinate measuring the steadiness of her authority, every elder waiting for the first crack. The human on her floor was, in the eyes of those elders, the most obvious crack. War Prize. That was the official designation. Callum Bright of the 3rd Earth Survey Fleet, taken during the border skirmish that had never technically been a war, handed to her as a gesture of political goodwill by the Admiralty, who assumed a caste mother of her age would appreciate a curiosity. Something to display. Something soft and decorative that asked no questions her station wasn't prepared to answer. He asked a great many questions, actually. About the brood egg. About the zero-gravity corridors. About why the palace rotated at that specific angle relative to the nearest star. She answered none of them at first. Then she answered all of them, which she chose not to think about. The needles clicked. Sereth settled into her chair and opened the evening report on the council's trade dispute. She did not look at him. She had a policy about that. His pain threshold is embarrassingly low, she had told Caste Elder Voss at last month's evaluation, when Voss had raised a polished eyebrow at the presence of a human in the caste mother's private wing. He bruises from moderate contact. His bones fracture under pressure any Pauluri child would absorb without comment. He knits. She had delivered the last word with a particular flatness that she'd hoped communicated irrelevance. Connective tissue in humans stores elastic energy like a tension spring. She had read once in a xenobiology brief, absorbing force and releasing it through muscle contraction. Sereth had noted it and moved on. It seemed like something that would matter to a researcher. Not to her. Voss had laughed, politely. Sereth had smiled, correctly. She glanced at the brood egg on the shelf. Still amber. Still pulsing. The needles clicked twice. Then stopped. If the idea of a war prize who knits while the galaxy burns makes your blood run cold, you should be worried, because you haven't seen what happens next. That stillness after the needles stopped was the first wrong thing. Callum Bright was not a still creature. He fidgeted during meals. He hummed off-key near the water panels. He had once reorganized his secondary archive by a system she still hadn't deciphered, then apologized cheerfully when she found it. He was not quiet. Not like this. Stay with this. You're going to want to remember exactly what you missed. The alert reached the palace at the 19th hour. Spine Stalker. Singular classification. Corridor breach. Sublevel 7. The emergency tone was a sound Sereth had trained for but never heard outside drills. A 3-note drop that meant something biological and hungry had entered the station's pressurized interior and was already moving toward the occupied levels. The corridor lights shifted to amber emergency, then red. Sereth was on her feet and reaching for the door panel when she registered that Callum was no longer on the floor. He was standing at the chamber window, looking down through the glass floor panel at the sublevel corridor below. His knitting was on the chair. The gray yarn trailed off the seat, one needle still tangled in the loops. He was watching the movement beneath them with an expression she had no framework to read. Not fear, not stillness either. Something underneath stillness, something that had cleared the way for a different kind of attention. The brood egg dimmed on the shelf. She noticed that. She did not know why she noticed it. The security detail will contain the breach, Sereth said, because that was the correct sentence for this moment. You should move to the interior. He rolled his sleeves up. One arm, then the other. The action was so ordinary, so deliberate, so entirely wrong for the alarm still sounding in the corridor that Seretha's voice stopped mid-sentence and did not return. She watched him push the fabric back over his forearms with the focused economy of someone preparing to work. Not to run, not to hide, to work. He picked up the brood egg from the shelf without asking. "Hold this for me," he said, and handed it to her. Then he walked to the chamber door and opened it. Into the corridor, where the red lights were. What the xenobiology brief had described as stored elastic energy releasing through muscle contraction was, Sereth would later attempt to record in clinical language, entirely inadequate as a description of what happened in sublevel Corridor 7. The spine stalker was a predator built for pressurized environments, 4 meters of segmented cartilage and magnetic claw hooks designed to disarticulate bone at speed. It had killed 2 security officers before the detail had retreated to the upper junction. Callum Bright walked into the corridor and stopped. The spine stalker turned. What followed lasted approximately 40 seconds. Seretha's veins went dark at the 12-second mark. By 20 seconds, the cracks had spread from her wrist to her collarbone. The cracked glass lines that marked every Pelori's fear response were supposed to be involuntary. Sereth had learned, in 14 months of cast motherhood, to suppress them in council chambers, in assessments, in the presence of elders who watched for weakness. She could not suppress them now. Gouged both eyes clean. That was it. That was the whole of it. No weapon. No tool from the security locker 2 meters away. His hands. His forearms. Those ridiculous forearms she had never given a single moment of serious consideration. And 40 seconds. And the thing that had killed 2 trained officers was on the corridor floor and not moving, and Callum Bright was bleeding from a gash along his jaw and breathing like he'd just finished something unpleasant rather than something impossible. He also unknit spines, she thought, and did not know if the thought was humor or horror or both simultaneously. He turned back toward the chamber door. His eyes found hers through the observation panel. She realized she was still holding the brood egg. It was warm against her palm. Warmer than it had been in days. The amber pulse had returned. Steady, unhurried. She met him at the door. She pulled him into her arms before she understood that she was doing it, before the decision traveled from whatever rational center of her mind had governed the last 14 months down to her hands. He let her. His blood was on her cast robes, and she did not move. The human that 2 officers couldn't stop. The war prize. The one with the knitting. The brood egg rested between them, glowing. Seretha's veins did not go rose gold. She was a caste mother. She had a policy. They went rose gold. Reclassify the human. He is not a consort. He is a force of nature. That image, her veins going rose gold while she holds a man covered in someone else's blood, lives in your head now. You're welcome.